Hello everyone, so welcome to the next version of Donation, and in this version now we're bringing in, still using retrofit, but now we're bringing in Firebase Authentication. This is the first step towards where you're going to have to do a little bit of configuration every time, even if you download the solution, because this needs to be tied to your Firebase console as opposed to my one. Okay, so if we just actually show you my own console for the moment, so you can see here I'm under the Authentication tab. Okay, so I suppose you can see there, this, I've been doing obviously some testing on other versions. So this is ultimately, we'll be dealing with our Google sign-in, but for the moment, this version will just kind of authenticate on a basic email and password setup. Okay, so you can see we've 4 users. There's Maggie, Lisa, Bart and Marge. So I'll concentrate on just Bart for the moment, who has existing donations made, and we can just kind of take it through showing how that works and how it should work if you've done the lab correctly. And then we kind of add a new one as well. We might add in Homer just to prove that we can create new users as well. Quite straightforward enough using Firebase and the Firebase authentication. Okay, so as well as our console, just want to show you the backend server. So this is, I've done this is the node server again, accessing the /donations endpoint. So again, you can see there's a couple from Marge there. Here we have a couple from Bart. So if you just look at those, his amount, there's just kind of something to point out: 1,000, 1,001. There's another one, 234. So hopefully when we log in as Bart, we should see those listed in our list of donations on the Android app. Okay, and I suppose for completeness as well, I just want to show you, here is the backend database, the MongoDB database that the donations are actually being stored in. Okay, so what happens is we make a donation, for argument's sake, in our Android app. Retrofit accesses we're using the retrofit library. We can access then the endpoints on the node server, which in turn accesses and then stores, retrieves, deletes, updates, whatever you want to do on our MongoDB. So if you were looking to do this yourself from scratch, this is like an approach you could take, but you'd have to build your own backend database. You'd have to have your backend server. So again, as we will see moving through the weeks, using Firebase to do essentially the same job is a lot more straightforward. So that's why kind of Firebase is always recommended as that backend service if you're building, especially building Android apps. But Firebase, as we know, works with your iOS and web as well. Okay, so if I just go back to our application, so see it here on the right hand side in the emulator, I suppose just point a note here. It's I'm running this on a Pixel at 3a with Android 11 on it, API 30. So you would need to make sure that from your console you have downloaded your Google JSON configuration file and have connected to your own Firebase console for this solution to work. Okay, so just to take you through some of the features. So if we log in here with Bart at simpson.com, and punch in his password. So when we sign in, and again, now this may take a moment or so depending on the speed of your connection, but that's quick enough for me here. And you can see there was 1,000, 1,001 and 234 that that I highlighted on the server itself. Okay, so what we can do is we have our delete, we have our edit, and then if we go into our edit, just click on it there, it loads up. And again, just to make a simple change there, and then we update and we come back and it'll refresh there. There we go. So there's our 1,002. You can see it there, 1,002. And if we go back to our server, there it is, and we refresh here, you can see it there in our list. Specifically the amount there, 1,002. So it's all kind of synchronized. Okay, and if we just go back for a second there again, just make another donation for Bart. Again, just kind of points to note here, we're utilizing Bart's email that we've signed in. So this is all part of a new view model we've added. I'll go through that now in a minute. And then if we go to donate, and again, we'll just do 1, 2, 3. And again, direct. And again, keep track of the total there so far. So our total goes up. There's our donation. And if we go back, look at our report. There it is. We've retrieved again from the server 1, 2, 3. And if we go back, and then you can do this yourself if you want to confirm. So just refresh our server again. And somewhere down the bottom there, possibly, there it is. There's our 1, 2, 3 amount after been stored. Okay, so if you notice, the main difference between this and the previous version, which didn't have multi-user support, is that we are now adding an email field to our donation so that we can keep track of each and who owns the donation, basically. Okay, so if we just have a look at the code behind all this, so it is starting to get quite complex. Okay, so here's our full project in terms of the code. So we have our adapters, we have our API, there's our Firebase, which is the new kind of package we've brought in, and then the existing models, the UI, and our kind of utils. So if we have a quick look just at the API first, because we would have had to change that. So in the client itself, the first change, let's expand that for you now. So the first change we need to make is we're now accessing that other server. So I suppose when you're running this yourselves, there could be no harm in waking up that server first, because it is Heroku. It's a free plan, so sometimes it mightn't be as quick. So kind of good example to just hit that server and wake it up. Okay, all the rest of it's the same, nothing new there. So that's really the only change you need to make on the server side. There are a few changes in the retrofit service itself. So if you have a look here in the interface donation service, there's a few extra little bits we need to add in. Primarily we have to add this extra parameter, the email, that we need to pass in our request so that we can identify the particular user that we want to delete a donation from or retrieve an individual donation. Here we are passing the ID, or get all their donations. So there's some subtle differences there, and again, this ties back to the server itself. So from the developer's point of view, the client side of the Android app, we just need to know the changes that we need to make in the requests that we're sending in. So again, I kind of walked through some of those in the in the rest of the code there. Okay, so that would have been the donation service. Close those down. In terms of the model, so again, in our donation store, we have modified, again, passing in here we are, look, there's our email. So again, we'll take you through all this in the lab as well. So most of the functions that were that need to be changed, obviously, are the ones the kind of the CRUD functionality, the deleting, updating. And because we need to identify the individual user, this is the approach we're taking. Now, look, there are other ways to do this, but I think this is probably the most straightforward one and easiest to understand. Okay, so that's the kind of approach we're going to take here. Okay, in the model itself, you can see here we are just adding in that email. So that's just one extra field that we're adding in to just be able to, as I said, keep track of what donations belong to which user. Okay. In terms of the UI, we have in our auth section. So I'll look at that in a minute. We'll come back to the this is kind of like the option for signing in. So we have there's our donate is still okay. There's our home, our report still okay. A few little changes need to be made in all these, which take you through in the lab. But because of the fact that we're applying this model, the MVVM pattern, it does cut down a huge amount in terms of the changes that do need to be made, should I say. Okay, so if we just focus on the Firebase element for the moment. Okay, so the approach I'm taking, again, I have links to the resources that I would have used as a starting point. Okay, so I'm bringing in this a Firebase Authentication Manager. Okay, and what we're going to keep track of in here is a number of references. So we're going to keep track of an application object, an instance there. We have a Firebase Auth reference. We're going to keep track of a Firebase user, which is going to be mutable, so we can change that. In essence, what we're trying to do here with this particular class, and we will use this going forward as well, is to be able to, wherever we happen to be in the app, to be able to check, be able to validate, verify, and find out which user we're dealing with. Because if you think about it, using this approach, we have all the functionality separated out into its own little parts, its own little components. So when we're donating, we're using a totally separate component as to when we're displaying our information, editing, deleting, so on and so forth. So we want to keep track of wherever we happen to be in our app. We want to keep track of that particular user. So using this Firebase Auth Manager is the approach we're going to take. Okay, and again, ties back into a lot of the functionality that we would have kind of covered in the previous section. So if we just scroll down a little bit just to show you what we have in here, is we have a couple of different kind of code blocks, I suppose, right? So we have our init block, so this is going to be kicked off when a new instance is created. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get a Firebase Auth instance and then check to see is the user logged in or not. Okay, so we're just checking our Firebase Auth. If once the current user is not null, right, we're updating the user with that current user. So we can demonstrate this in the app as well. Until you log out, you remain logged in. So even if you, and that's what as from, I suppose, from a use case perspective, as a user, you'd expect that to happen, that until you sign out from somewhere, you're kept signed in. So we would have some other properties. Look, we have a logged out property. We have just keeping track of some error status as well. So up here, mutable live data, both of them, just simple booleans to keep track of, are we logged in or not? So initially, if the user is already logged in, right, we're going to specify our logged out to be false. Likewise, error handling is okay. And then inside the other functions that we're using, so if I just collapse them down for a little bit there, we have three main functions there: log in, register, log out. And that's all we want to do with this Firebase Auth Manager, is allow a user to be able to log in to Firebase, and we'll kind of authenticate against Firebase. If not, we'll register again against Firebase, and then if they want to log out, so that in theory a different user could sign in, we will use our log out as well. Okay, so if we look at our login, we're basically tying directly into the Firebase function. So again, we'll have covered these in the previous section. So here we are, here's our look, sign in with email and password, passing in the email and password. So these will be triggered back in a particular view model, which again we look at now in due course. Just adding a callback there. So if it completes correctly, here we are updating the live Firebase user property to that current the auth.current user property that we get back from Firebase. Okay, and again making sure there's no errors. Otherwise, we will update our error status there. So again, mainly from a developer's point of view, just keeping track. Likewise, excuse me, with the register, we have it here again. Create user with email and password. So this is taken directly from those functions directly from the Firebase libraries. Okay, in our case, just for the authentication, and then we do our own little bit of work as well. If it's successful, do the same again. Update our Firebase, and then just kind of error handling, making sure everything's okay. And the last one there, which is our log out, quite simply we'll sign out of Firebase and then update our logged out and error status values as well. Okay, so this is a separate class that we will make use of inside a particular view model. So if we go back and see where we have it wrapped up, which is inside this auth package, okay, we have we have a login activity, right, with our app compat activity, keeping track of our view models. We have a login register view model. We have our own create, so do some binding there, tying to those the email sign in, the email create account. Okay. I shall expand that for you totally so we can have a look, and then we'll work back the way. Okay. So when we start, when our activity starts, we instantiate the view model. Just give me colors right for there now. We instantiate the view model, our login register view model, and then keep track of the live Firebase user inside. So at any stage, no matter where we happen to be, if the user signs out and then they sign back in again, we're keeping track of this, and we will update that particular live Firebase user instance, which is inside our login register view model. And again, we'll have a look at that now in a second. Okay. Some other options there, again tied to the UI, which are similar to the tutorials on Firebase. So we have our own create account. So again, look there, we're passing in an email and password, triggering the register on the view model, which in turn, as we'll see now in a minute, will trigger the register inside our Firebase Auth manager. Likewise, same with the sign in, we're triggering the login, and a couple of other there, check status, validate form, just kind of helper functions essentially, just to make sure that there's an email is entered correctly, that it's required, so on and so forth. Okay, but most of the work is done back inside our logged in view model and our login register view model. So if we have a look at the login register view model first, not a huge amount going on, so we can see where we've separated out all that work inside that Firebase Auth manager. So all it is, if we expand it there for a little bit, here we have our Firebase Auth manager, an instance of it. And again, passing in a reference to the application. Again, this is interesting, just to make a note here, we're not extending from the standard view model here, we're extending from the Android view model, which gives us application-wide context. Okay, so that's just important to note in this particular instance, because we want to keep track of the Firebase user across the whole application. Okay, there's the Firebase user itself, which again is an instance, or we're assigning it the property from our Firebase Auth manager .live Firebase user, and two simple functions that I said just triggers what's inside our Auth manager. Okay, and again I take you through this in the lab itself. Okay, and then back in the logged in view model. So this is where we can keep track of the user itself. Just expand that again for you. Okay, so once we're logged in, all we want to keep track of is if the user actually logs out. So not a huge amount going on here, all to do with just the design, but once again we're extending from Android view model. Okay, you could, I suppose in theory, wrap all this up inside the one view model, but just following the tutorial I was looking at and the links I would have supplied for you, it made a little bit more sense to separate out that the concerns of being logged in and then logging out and kind of resetting all these properties. Okay, there's a few other things I just want to take you through as well. So that was our model. That's done. We can close down that. We close down the API, the auth itself. If we look at some of the activities themselves and the fragments, should I say, and how we utilize and make use of this user. Okay, so if we look at our report view model, so in here we're going to keep track of, so we're adding, so the lab would have involved modifying and adding to our view model properties. So here we're going to keep track of a live Firebase user in here. Okay, and then when we load up, when the report view actually starts, here we are using our donation manager again, that find all, but this time we're passing in the email of that live Firebase user, which will be the email that the user has registered with on Firebase. So that's going to be the Firebase email. Okay, we have a couple other functions there if you want to actually delete an element. So this is wrapped up inside the report because we can delete from the report screen. Okay, if we go back to the fragment itself, how we use that. There's one important thing I want to show you here. We'll expand it here now again. Up to now, we have been kind of creating an instance of the view model that we require inside the onCreator, inside the onCreate view, right? In this situation, and kind of will be very useful going forward, because we want to share that information and share view models across fragments. You can actually use this here, this by activity view models. Right, my colors has gone mad again. Okay, so if we declare our, here we are, our report view model and our logged in view model, there's the relevant types, but if we declare it by activity view models, okay, this allows us and kind of gives us a kind of a shared instance. So we can, any changes that are made here are reflected everywhere else we're using. So we don't need to get the individual instance. This will be observed and modified and updated across all fragments that declare it like so. Okay. So again, because we want to keep track of the user, and if the user deletes and we want to go off and call something else, same with edit, it makes sense to declare it like so. So we only use it, we can use it the same way. So here we are down here in our report view model, observing the list, the observable donations list, but we haven't had to get an explicit instance of it. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. I do cover it and talk about it a little bit more detail in the labs, but just to cover it here in the kind of in the code walkthrough. Okay, there's a lot more going on in here as well inside a report, because again, we can swipe to edit, we can swipe to delete. So here we are adding both handlers. Okay, and here we are triggering for the delete. Here we are triggering the delete function on our report view model. For editing, at the moment, we're just working with the on click, but ultimately we will actually be able to swipe to edit as well. That'll be in the next version. Okay, and if we go back to our donate, you'll see something similar. So in our donate view model, right, we have minimal changes here. In fact, there aren't any changes at all, right, because it's in the fragment that we pass in extra information. So here we are again, keeping track of our report view model, our logged in view model, declared by activity view models. So we're sharing this particular view model instance. And then if we go down to our button listener, in here, when we add a donation on our donate view model, as well as passing in the payment amount, and the payment type, should I say, payment method, and the amount, we're now passing in the email of that logged in view model, our live Firebase user. So that, as I said before, that's the email that the user would have registered with. Okay, so the lab would take you through all those particular changes that you need to make. Quite small, might I add. Basically just changing parameters, changing functions to take that extra parameter so that we can keep track of the user that's logged in, and then and kind of validate against the backend server when the user wants to delete, wants to update, and wants to donate. Okay. Other than that, I think the rest, as I said, is covered in the lab itself. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that by activity view models, which is very useful. And we will see this again in later versions. We would have made the change in our API in terms of the accessing the new server and modifying our interface, which Retrofit will then manage for us. And then are changing the model as well, because we're managing an email. As the weeks go by and we start to add in some additional features, we will revisit the model and can change that as well. And we may bring in some other view models also, depending on what we want to do. But for the moment, I hope that kind of makes a little bit clearer about the our retrofit multi-user version of our application. So what we will do in the next lab is similar to the way we brought in the authentication, and we have an authentication manager and a separate kind of dedicated class for that. We will do the same in our Firebase package for our database. So in the next version, we move away from retrofit and kind of that node server altogether, and then it will all be nice and self-contained within our Firebase console. Okay, so other than that, I think that's it. So thanks for listening, and goodbye.